Ira, software engineer. That's 3 words.
That works.
I'm Alec, reliability engineer.
Marcos, tech startup newsletter writer.
Nice.
Aaron, experience designer.
Yanni, physicist.
Hi, Veronica, data analyst and enthusiast.
Neha, data management consultant and enthusiast.
Enthusiast is Shelby, API enthusiast.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia, urban planner and cyclist.
I am Eric, horticulturalist and climatologist.
Melanie, social justice communicator.
I'm Ray, infrastructure archiving.
Rico, hopeful technocrat.
That's right. Adjective stuff.
Not necessarily connected. Rafi, coder, organizer.
Raghav Goyal, analytics consultant in healthcare.
Sweet.
Yuga, computer science student.
And I'm Ryan, policy analyst.
I'm Anusfi. I'm a user experience designer.
I'm Sean, I'm a developer and a socialist.
Olivia Joking, urban planner.
I'm Mojisa, but he's not that easy. I'm a work in progress. I don't know.
Nathan, I'm new dad.
Congratulations.
Okay.
My name's Eve.
And one word, the 2 words that describe you.
More caffeinated.
I wish I was actually.
Liz Barry.
Hi, I'm Liz Barry, and I fly balloons. Great.
I don't think we'll be taking pictures, but if you don't want pictures of you taken or things videotaped, just let us know. Who's next?
Use that one forward.
I'll just take the photo of the next
What do you want this? Or you want me to choose sides?
one. Hi, so we're going to try out, I guess, an experimental workshop that just came together, based on methods and experiences that Liz and I have been talking about and thinking about for a while now. And our third colleague couldn't make it because of flight snafus, sadly. But she will find us somewhere along the way. We get started. All right. So what if the Occupy movement and Occupy New York, in particular, had gone a completely different way? What if it had resulted in a broad-based consensus that showed government what steps to take? And what if New York's civic tech community was asked by city government to put up an open process for rulemaking? What would our futures be like? And that is what our workshop is based on. And this is actually something that's happening in Taiwan. Taiwan had a giant revolution in 2014. They call it a movement, but a revolution is really what it is. They are very modest people. And they have now embarked on this experiment that involves government and people from all parts of civil society. And one of the big projects that have come out of it is called the V-Taiwan process, and it's an open consultation between government and civil society that leads to legislation, and it leads to digital legislation. And what we're going to mock up is the V-Taiwan process and think about how this process can be put to place in New York to solve New York's issues. The V-Taiwan process, from the beginning, government and civil society are collaborating together. Even the task force, the group that sets up the V-Taiwan process, consists of both government and civil society. members. So even the process is open for change by citizens. And every Wednesday, for the whole day, the Taiwan task force sets up shop in this giant dim sum room style space. And it's an open door, and people can come in and they could talk about issues that they have, and the issue is put to vote. And if the community at large decides that this issue needs to move into deliberation, it then moves into the Taiwan process. And these issues are digital issues. They could be brought in person by someone coming in and talking about the issue. People can drop in through livecast. And it can also come in through government channels where proposals are put up on the government website. They can be voted on, and then based on those votes, they come in. So there's a whole distributed process through which issues can come into into the Taiwan open consultation process. And what we're going to do is actually just kind of role play the entire process, both as a way to understand it, but also as a way to think about how we can use that in New York and the lessons that they have learned. How it can be adapted for here. And this is what Liz and I will be doing. We will be facilitators, and we'll tell you what that is. And the issue we have picked, of course, this should have been done in a far more egalitarian way, but for now, since we have to, pre-bake everything, it's going to be the L train shutdown. This is a really important issue for the city in many ways, not just because it's core infrastructure, but also because it's a contentious issue that right now is very much on the table. Do you want to add more to that, the L train issue?
Just that there have been many public meetings about this issue, but because the meetings were were kicked off with a proposal, public comments came in as a response. Well, maybe I have other ideas, or did you consider these facts? Or, overall, is this the right approach to take? All of the public response came in unstructured and all at once. And so we're going to walk through a process of, and the MTA does need to hold more meetings on this. They're planning to hold more meetings. So this is perhaps a suggestion in this case, an example to explore a general model of how could you do open consultation in a more organized fashion.
Yeah, and in a more collaborative fashion. Every issue in this way of building consensus and coming on action based on that consensus consists of a facilitator. So an issue is owned by a facilitator who's sort of the MC of the process, maybe just shuttles the issue through the various stages, is the point person for making sure that the issue moves through all processes in the right manner. And every issue also has a government owner. And this is really important because the government owner is responsible for taking the consensus-based decision into action. And they're there right from the very beginning, so they get all the information, they're in the process that eventually builds to consensus, and then they're responsible for moving into action. Yeah.
Are you using the term owner to be synonymous with stakeholder?
No, so they are a stakeholder as well, but they're the ones who are in charge of, say, this needs to go into legislation, they will push it through into legislation. So it's almost like a government authority. In Taiwan's Uber case, for example, it was the Ministry of Transportation that was responsible for enacting any of the decisions that came out of the process.
I don't mean to split hairs.
No.
But I will.
You should.
I just question the term owner, given that presumably in a more or less democratic government, aren't the people the owners?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah,
Oh.
so I'm just trying to understand.
No, so
Yeah,
ownership, no, this is a good point. So everybody is a stakeholder in this, so everyone who will be affected by this decision, or in this case, the L train being shut down, is a stakeholder. And the government, there could be multiple government agencies involved, and of those, one of those agencies is responsible.
So it's more like a product owner. That person who's
like a point person.
Whose responsibility
Yeah.
is.
Yes, very much. In both cases. So the facilitator is the person who is responsible for the process moving through in a clean manner, and then the government authority or the government owner is, as we've called it, is the person who's responsible for the action being taken. A point person. Sure.
Yeah, one more question.
If I may, how do you pick the facilitator?
So this is a really good point. The facilitator is somebody who's interested in the issue but doesn't have any personal skin in the game. So for example, in Taiwan had one of the cases that went through was how revenge porn would be tackled, and this is the idea that and they found that a lot of teenagers, once the relationships ended, they found pictures that were taken in the privacy of a relationship up on the net, and this was becoming a serious problem in Taiwan. And so the person who's responsible for this issue is an activist who brought up the issue, but somebody who hasn't been affected by this in any way. She's not a victim, not a perpetrator. In the drone case, it was a journalist he was a journalist. And so it's a person who's interested in any capacity, but not directly involved.
But is he voted? I mean, how is he?
Neutral.
Is he voted? How was he getting selected?
So it's some combination. Sometimes in the case of the revenge porn, it was the person who decided that this issue should be tackled by the government. So the activist who brought this issue into the V-Taiwan process. In the case of the drone issue, it was a journalist who had written a lot about these sorts of technologies. So it's.
But then there is a voting process on how to field an issue.
Yeah, so there's a voting process on which issue will be taken up, because multiple issues come up. The facilitator, I don't think it's a direct voting process. I don't know how many people are standing in line for this. There's usually a person who's sort of more naturally the person who'll take it up, either the person who brought up the issue or somebody who's knowledgeable about it but not directly involved in it.
So an activist, though, sounds like they already have a particular slant on it and what they want to have happen.
It's a thin line. This is a really interesting.
So it's actually a neutral facilitator as you normally think of one.
Absolutely. And this for her, actually, Liz and I have been talking a lot to her about her experience going through this process. And this is exactly one of the things she said, that initially she brought it up because it was something she was very moved by. There was, yet another suicide of a 15-year-old, and this was something she was horrified by, and she brought it up, and she wanted things to go one way, but through the course of the discussions, she learned to step back and listen, and many of her opinions on this matter changed over course. So in some ways, it's a fine line between being interested and too interested, that you have a lot of skin in the game, but part of being a good facilitator is being able to step back and listen, and that's the training that's received through this process. Everybody was trained for a couple of days.
Yeah, I was going to say what Darshana just started to say. When we get to the end of our time together, we're going to be talking about facilitator training.
Yes.
Because what's on the table is that this team that is kind of both inside Taiwan's government and still operating in the civic tech community run a 3-day training course. The materials are only in Mandarin. We want to bring it stateside. We have Canadian collaborators, but we need to get it organized. So yeah, we're going to kind of end up in this point of like, what is facilitation? And I think to the conversation just happened, I would just put forward the phrase like concerned citizen, like concerned wanting to see action on an issue without knowing what should be done, but like really caring that society figure out some way forward. For instance, in so many of our divisive issues, how not to be either use yourself as like one more pellet in an advocacy cannon of public opinion on one side or another, and how to get past blockades. Actually taking serious the idea of like rational public discourse. And I think that's why we got so inspired and then obsessed with what's going on in Taiwan, because it's nothing like what's going on over here.
Mm-hmm. We move? Yeah. Any more questions? No. Okay, so designed this whole thing for the L train shutdown, one of the first things that happen, you have an issue come up, you have a facilitator for the issue, you have a government authority who's responsible for the issues, and then you have to figure out the stakeholders, which is all of the people who are affected by this change or by this issue, and everybody who should be in the conversation. And these are examples of the people who should be in an L train shutdown conversation. Of course, the government officials like Department of Transportation, MTA, the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics need to be in there, but also taxi drivers, because this will change the Taxi and Limo Commission, because this will change the way they operate. Subway riders, urban planners will have important information. Port Authority, there will be changes there. And so everybody should be in this conversation together. And once the issue platform has been laid out, it moves through this very structured process of consensus building. You start with facts, move on to everybody talking about their feelings, reflecting on these facts. You come up with ideas as to how you can, or we can, in this case, what we can live with, what we can't live without, and then you have decisions at the very end. And we'll go through each of these phases.
These are, so the Gov0 community is what the civic tech community in Taiwan is called. Like Gov, G0V, but spelled with a 0 in the middle of it. And there's so many great stories about the Gov0 community. But I'm bringing it up because they created this easier to understand kind of emoji-based communication of a process that emerged through some very thoughtful Canadian process, and with a name not nearly as catchy, ORID, acronym ORID. And so there is long, very earnest precedent for structuring a conversation in these phases, but now it's more fun.
Yeah, and extending on that, there's a long history of where this material comes from as well. Like Liz mentioned, the Canadian history of structured conversations. They also pulled a lot from Cornell's rulemaking methodologies. It's called the e-rulemaking or Cornell rulemaking room. And that was a huge source of inspiration. So this is an adapting, evolving methodology that just kind of harvests from different places. The fact phase. So the facts phase is where stakeholders inform themselves of all of the various facts, and they bridge communication gaps by interpreting terminologies, jargons, and vocabularies. This is really important because we need to know exactly what we're talking about and get on the same page before decisions can be made. And so everything, there's no jargon, everything is broken down, there's a dictionary built so everything can be translated, and they use a number of tools, open source and otherwise, that aid this process. And these are the tools they use. So Google Docs, SlideShare, Dropbox is used, GitHub. HackMD is actually a really neat tool that was developed by the Gov0 community, the Taiwan Civic Tech community that Liz just talked about. And all of these resources are used to accumulate information, and the range of them just sort of shows how many ways in which you can interact with this process. Yeah.
Shouldn't only non-commercial platforms use?
They start that way. So the first preference is always for an open source tool, but then accessibility sometimes becomes an issue. So then you have to make some judgment as to what is broadly accessible to people versus available. So they start with the open source tool, and if there's no open source tool, kind of move down the other. HackMD is one of them, yeah.
And they take open source very seriously, and if they find themselves using a commercial proprietary version of something for accessibility reasons, they immediately start funding an open source alternative. So they put money down to for a longer term future, not requiring those proprietary tools.
Yeah, and we can't test all of them, but maybe we can introduce you to HackMD. So we start off by seeing what it's like to get facts as a stakeholder group. If you can form stakeholder groups, maybe we can pick 3 or 4, and then Liz and I have set up a HackMD if you want to access that. That's available, and you could see what it's like to accumulate information. We have the bit.ly up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me talk through this. When we first came into the room, we encouraged people to disorganize their chairs, really play up the individuality of all of us. And now, our role playing is mostly about moving chairs around. Don't feel like you're really going to be put on the spot or have to like do a hard task right now.
Yeah, you won't be tested on any of this.
But so we all help like really remember these phases. We're going to take our chairs now and just form into a few small circles. It doesn't matter who you form with. And then you can go to this HackPad link and kind of try on for size the idea of pulling together facts from the perspective of your stakeholder group. And those stakeholder groups are written down in the HackPad.
And we've put in some
that make sense?
resources as well.
Okay, so now is the time everyone stand up. And you can keep your chair or go to a different chair, but kind of pull them around to make a few small groups so you can talk to each other.
I'm going to stop the recording now and restart it when we come to the end of this, right?
Okay.
Sure.
And then also, my power is down here, so please be careful when moving the chair.
Yes.